The scent of antiseptic filled the air, blending with the distant hum of machinery and the faint murmurs of voices in the hallway. For Olivia Carter, this was just another routine night shift at St. Anne's Hospital, or at least, that's what she thought before the commotion erupted in the emergency room. The man who had just been wheeled in on a stretcher was no ordinary patient. The staff whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with astonishment and disbelief. "It's him," a nurse gasped, her eyes widening. "Nathaniel Pierce, the tech billionaire." Olivia glanced up from her clipboard. Nathaniel Pierce was a household name, a tech mogul who had revolutionized industries and amassed an almost limitless fortune. But beyond his fame, there was something else, persistent rumors about a peculiar condition. They said Nathaniel suffered from a rare disorder, a severe allergy to physical contact with women. Tabloid headlines and late-night talk show jokes had turned it into a bizarre legend. Olivia had always dismissed it as mere gossip, yet here he was, lying unconscious, his pale skin stark against the crisp white hospital sheets. His perfectly tailored suit was now torn and stained with blood, a far cry from the polished image that graced magazine covers. "A car accident," someone whispered. His car skidded on black ice and crashed into the guardrail. Minor injuries, but the shock made him pass out. "We need to clean his wounds before the doctor arrives," the head nurse said, scanning the room. "Olivia, you're up." Her stomach dropped. "Me? Are you sure?" The head nurse arched an eyebrow. "You're one of the best here. Just follow protocol. He's sedated. He probably won't even wake up." Olivia hesitated. She was no stranger to difficult patients, but tending to a man who physically couldn't tolerate a woman's touch felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Still, reason and responsibility prevailed. She nodded. In the dimly lit room, Olivia gathered the necessary supplies and approached the hospital bed. Nathaniel's face was shadowed by stubble, his dark hair tousled from the crash. Up close, he looked human, vulnerable even. A stark contrast to the cold, untouchable figure the world knew. She took a steadying breath, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she dipped a cloth into warm water. With careful precision, she began wiping away the dirt and dried blood from his arms and chest. Every movement was deliberate, cautious, like navigating a razor-thin line between care and intrusion. Midway through, his eyelids twitched. Olivia froze. A low groan escaped his lips, and then his storm gray eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were unfocused, dazed. Then they locked onto hers. "Where?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "You're at St. Anne's Hospital," Olivia said gently, maintaining a soothing tone. "You were in an accident. You're safe now." His gaze flicked downward, taking in the wet cloth in her hand and the damp towel draped across his torso. Awareness flickered across his face, quickly followed by panic. "Stop," he rasped, his body tensing. "Don't touch me." Olivia stepped back immediately, her hands raised in surrender. "I'm sorry. Your wounds needed cleaning. I was just following medical protocol." Nathaniel attempted to sit up, but pain shot through his ribs, making him grimace. His breathing quickened, and for a moment, Olivia worried he might panic. She reached for the call button. "Wait," he said, his voice steadier now, though still laced with tension. "I'm fine. Just give me a moment." She hesitated, watching as he took deep, measured breaths, gradually regaining control. Every movement seemed calculated, as if even breathing required deliberate effort. "I've heard about you," she said after a pause, her voice gentle. "About your condition. I understand if this is difficult." His eyes narrowed slightly, an invisible shield rising between them. "You don't understand," he said curtly. "No one does." Olivia met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe not, but I do know that everyone deserves care, Mr. Pierce. Even you." For a moment, something shifted in his expression. A crack in the armor, a flicker of vulnerability. But just as quickly, it vanished. "Care," he muttered, leaning back against the pillows. "That's a new one." Olivia's lips curved into a faint smile. "You'd be surprised how far it can go." She busied herself tidying the supplies, giving him space to process. But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Wait." She turned back, slightly surprised to see hesitation flicker across his face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Olivia Carter." He nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. "Thank you, Olivia." Just two simple words, but coming from him, they carried immense weight. She gave a small nod in return and stepped out, closing the door quietly behind her. Outside, the chatter among the staff continued, speculation running wild. Olivia ignored it, her thoughts lingering on the man she had just met. There was something about him, something beneath the guarded exterior and clinical diagnosis, that intrigued her. And unbeknownst to her, inside that hospital room, Nathaniel Pierce was thinking the same thing. For the first time in years, he felt something other than isolation. He couldn't name it yet, but it was enough to unsettle him. Nathaniel Pierce was not only famous for his wealth, but also for a rare condition he had to endure throughout his life. This syndrome made it impossible for him to touch women without experiencing excruciating pain. Despite being a billionaire renowned for his vast fortune and stellar reputation in the tech industry, Nathaniel faced an insurmountable challenge. For him, every touch, every affectionate gesture from a woman was both a physical and emotional agony, gradually pushing him to distance himself from everyone and build an impenetrable wall around him. He had grown accustomed to loneliness and had long since stopped expecting anyone to change that. For a man like Nathaniel, the feeling of isolation and the awareness of his difference were unavoidable. Meetings, parties, even business trips never made him feel like he truly belonged anywhere. He lived in a world where people only saw his success, his massive numbers and lucrative contracts, but no one saw the pain he endured daily. Nathaniel never sought to be the center of attention, yet his condition always made him the subject of conversation. This made him feel like an anomaly in the society he constantly struggled to adapt to. While Nathaniel's fame was widely recognized, no one truly understood him. People often remembered him as the successful, wealthy man at grand events, but few knew that behind that exterior was a man trapped in his own body. Suffering, pain, and torment were his daily realities. He had once tried to find a cure for his condition, but every method proved futile. Thus, he had resigned himself to living with it, constructing a life devoid of women's presence, even those closest to him. Olivia Carter was the first to face Nathaniel after an accident he encountered. The accident happened on a stormy day when he lost control of his car and crashed into a guardrail. Although he only sustained minor external injuries, the sheer impact caused him to pass out and be rushed to the hospital. Olivia, a nurse at St. Anne's Hospital, was assigned to his care. She had heard about Nathaniel and his strange condition, but she had never truly believed that a person could live in such constant pain. While not one to be easily frightened, Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension when she was informed about this patient. When Olivia entered the hospital room, Nathaniel lay motionless on the bed, his face pale, eyes shut. The image of a powerful, successful man now appeared weak and strangely fragile. Looking at him, a wave of sympathy rose within Olivia. She didn't fully understand the pain he endured, but she could sense the loneliness in every movement, every breath he took. Though she had heard of his condition before, seeing him up close for the first time made her realize just how harsh his reality was. Nathaniel Pierce, a man who once had everything, was now suffering in a way few could ever imagine. Olivia gently approached the hospital bed, preparing to change Nathaniel's bandages. Though she knew he might react strongly, she also understood that she couldn't let him suffer alone. She began making the necessary movements to treat his wounds, but the moment her hands came close to him, Nathaniel stirred slightly. His eyes opened, and immediately, his gaze locked onto Olivia. The tension and anxiety in his expression were unmistakable. "Stop!" Nathaniel's voice was hoarse, his breath quickening. "Don't touch me!" Olivia halted instantly, but the tension in the room only intensified. She met his gaze, not with fear or hesitation, but with empathy. She didn't try to force his treatment, but understood that his reaction was not fear, but a pain that words couldn't describe. "I'm just following the doctor's orders," Olivia said softly but firmly. "You need care, you're injured, and I'm only doing what's necessary." Nathaniel tried to sit up, but the pain from his injuries forced him to stop. His breathing grew heavier, and Olivia watched him closely, worried that he might struggle to control his body. "I'm fine," Nathaniel muttered, his voice slightly more stable, though tension still lingered in his tone. "I just need some time." Olivia remained still, observing him. She didn't speak, simply watching, understanding that he needed a moment to calm himself. After a long silence, Nathaniel finally spoke. "I've heard about you," he said, his gaze no longer as rigid as before, though still guarded, "about my condition. But you can't possibly understand." Olivia didn't rush to respond. She looked at him, not with pity, but with patience and respect. "I'm not sure I can fully understand," she admitted, "but I do know that everyone deserves kindness and empathy. And so do you, Nathaniel." The silence between them stretched for a few moments, and Nathaniel's gaze flickered slightly. She looked into his eyes, and in that moment, she realized he was wrestling with himself. "Empathy," he murmured, as if the word was something unfamiliar. "That's something I've never really felt." Olivia offered a gentle smile before turning away to continue her work. She gave him space to think, to absorb her words. However, just as she was about to leave, Nathaniel unexpectedly called out, "Wait." Olivia turned back, noticing a flicker of hesitation on his face. She was surprised to see that he no longer seemed as rigid as before. Instead, there was something softer, something vulnerable, in need of comfort. "What's your name?" he asked. "Olivia Carter," she replied. Nathaniel nodded slowly, as if committing her name to memory. "Thank you, Olivia." A simple thank you, yet to Olivia, it felt like a light breaking through the darkness. She smiled before stepping out, leaving Nathaniel in a state of confusion, pondering himself and the unfamiliar emotions that Olivia had awakened within him. Olivia began to realize that Nathaniel's fears were not merely a medical condition, but a deeply ingrained part of his past. What she saw in his eyes, the indifferent reactions or even outright rejection when someone tried to touch him, was not just the result of an illness, but the aftermath of a painful event that had shaped his life. The days spent working with Nathaniel made Olivia ponder more about this man, and gradually, she understood that Nathaniel was not just a cold, brilliant businessman, but also a lonely soul, running from memories he could never erase. Each day, Olivia cared for Nathaniel with patience and respect. She had grown accustomed to him, no longer nervous or hesitant as she had been at first. Yet she remained attentive to his every movement and gesture. Every morning, when she entered his hospital room, Nathaniel would often sit in silence, his eyes staring into the distance, as if lost in thoughts he could not bring himself to share. In those moments, Olivia couldn't help but wonder what had happened in his past to make him this way. One afternoon, while Nathaniel was resting in his hospital bed, Olivia accidentally overheard a conversation between him and an old friend over the phone. His voice carried strength, but beneath it, there was an unmistakable undertone of helplessness. Through that call, Olivia began to piece together fragments of his past. He spoke about an old relationship, a woman who had once been an irreplaceable part of his life, only for it to end in tragedy. "She left me without a word of explanation," Nathaniel said, his voice cold, but Olivia could hear the bitterness woven into it. "I didn't know what to do. Everything fell apart right in front of me. The feeling of betrayal, it haunts me." Those words echoed in Olivia's mind for the rest of the afternoon. She couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal Nathaniel had endured. The loss, the loneliness, the pain of being abandoned by someone he had once loved. This was the real ghost that haunted him. Olivia understood that this heartbreak had built the impenetrable walls he now lived behind, keeping everyone at a distance. It was why Nathaniel couldn't tolerate physical touch, why he recoiled from intimacy, because he feared that closeness would only bring another wound, another unbearable pain. Day by day, Olivia saw more clearly the complexity within Nathaniel. He was not just a tough, distant businessman, but also a deeply wounded man, haunted by his past. She noticed the moments when he would drift away, as if reliving memories he could never escape. When she tried to reach out, he would flinch, instinctively withdrawing as if it were a reflex. Olivia realized he was not just afraid of physical pain, but terrified of confronting the emotions buried deep within him, emotions he could not control. Slowly, Olivia no longer saw Nathaniel as just a patient she was assigned to care for. Instead, she began to see him as a man carrying his own burdens of pain. In those quiet moments when he gazed out the window, his eyes weary and distant, she sensed the deep sorrow hidden within them. He was a man who had everything: wealth, power, success, but lacked something crucial: love and understanding. Nathaniel's fear was not just an obsession with his medical condition, it was the terror of facing emotions he had long suppressed. The painful memories of lost love had made it impossible for him to accept any form of affection. Olivia gradually began to notice more distinct signs in his behavior. One day, as she adjusted his bandages, her hand accidentally brushed against his. He flinched, his eyes widening in panic, as if she had done something terribly wrong. She immediately apologized, but deep inside she felt the weight of the pain he carried. What she saw was not just a simple medical condition, but a profound emotional trauma, a wound that would never truly heal. Olivia began to understand that Nathaniel's fear was not just about physical contact, but about emotions, about vulnerability, about something he had spent years trying to hide. The more time Olivia spent around Nathaniel, the more she sensed his loneliness. He might have been a brilliant leader, a renowned investor, but in the quiet moments, Olivia saw the truth. Nathaniel was utterly alone. He had no one to confide in, no one to trust, and this loneliness was not something he had chosen. It was something he had been forced into, shaped by the scars of his past. Olivia wondered if anyone could ever help him unlock the doors to his heart, or if he would forever remain trapped in this haunting solitude. Each passing day, Olivia became an irreplaceable presence in Nathaniel's life. Not just as a nurse, but as the only person who could see his hidden fragility. But was she strong enough to help him overcome this pain? Could love be the key to unlocking the door Nathaniel had sealed shut for so many years? Olivia knew the road ahead would not be easy. Nathaniel's emotional wounds ran too deep, and the memories of his lost love would not simply fade away. But she also understood that if no one dared to step into his world, Nathaniel would remain forever isolated, forever imprisoned by his fears. She didn't know if she could help him trust in people again, but she had made up her mind. She would not give up. She would be patient, just as she had been every day while caring for him. As news of Nathaniel's accident began to spread, media attention and public curiosity quickly turned toward St. Anne's. As always, Nathaniel's legal team acted immediately to protect his privacy. They requested his transfer to a private hospital where he would not be disturbed and could recover in a secure, secluded environment. This was the solution Nathaniel always chose whenever an incident occurred. He never wanted to appear before the public, never wanted to be drawn into unnecessary stories. However, when his legal representatives proposed this plan, something unexpected happened. Instead of agreeing as he always did, Nathaniel refused outright and decided to stay at St. Anne's, where he was currently being treated. This decision puzzled not only his lawyers and medical team, but also surprised Olivia. Standing by Nathaniel's hospital bed that morning, Olivia sensed something different in the air. Refusing the protection of a private hospital and choosing to remain at St. Anne's did not seem like the decision of a wealthy and powerful man like Nathaniel. For the first time since working with him, Olivia felt that something was changing in him, a change she could not yet explain. He was no longer the cold, untouchable man she had met when she first entered this hospital room. When she stepped into the room that morning, Nathaniel's gaze met hers with something that was no longer just distance or wariness. He was still lying there, his eyes filled with resilience and exhaustion. But this time, a fleeting trace of vulnerability passed through them. "Olivia," he called her name, his voice hoarse. "I've decided to stay in this hospital. I won't be transferring." Olivia was taken aback. She had heard about his legal team's plan and had assumed Nathaniel would agree without hesitation. But why? Nathaniel? She couldn't help but ask, knowing he might not appreciate the question. "You could be in a better place, somewhere without any outside interference." Nathaniel gave a faint smile, but it was a sad one. "I feel safer here," he said, his eyes lingering on the window as if searching for peace in a world filled with scrutiny and blinding lights. "Of course, I could go to a private hospital where no one would disturb me, but that would just be another place for me to keep running. I don't want to run anymore." His answer left Olivia confused. She didn't fully understand the depth of the pain he had endured, but his words made her realize that there was an internal battle raging within him. Nathaniel was not just a man who sought isolation as an escape from his problems. Although he had once built an invisible shield around himself, it now seemed as if he was slowly lowering it, ready to confront what he had spent years avoiding. Day by day, throughout his treatment at St. Anne's, the signs of change in Nathaniel became increasingly apparent. Olivia noticed that he no longer maintained the same rigid emotional walls as before. Whenever she approached, although he remained cautious, his reactions were no longer as severe as when she had first cared for him. Every small action of Nathaniel's indicated that he was struggling with emotions he could not yet control. One morning, as Olivia was preparing to change his bandages, she noticed him looking at her differently. His gaze was no longer cold, but rather one of quiet observation. Nathaniel began to talk more, sharing feelings he had kept buried for years. He was no longer just a man consumed by work. He started speaking about his past, his failed relationships, and the loneliness he had endured. "I've lived in fear for too long," Nathaniel sighed, his eyes filled with both resilience and sorrow. "Everything in life is a trade-off. I've lost too much simply because I was afraid of what might happen." Olivia stood there in silence, simply listening. She understood that Nathaniel was slowly opening up to her, even if just a little, and that made her feel a deep sense of empathy. He was not a man who lived behind a facade of strength. Beneath it all was a deeply wounded soul, a man fighting against a fear he could not share with anyone. Still, Nathaniel maintained a certain distance. He could not completely open up, could not bare his soul entirely, especially not to someone like Olivia. But there was one thing Olivia noticed. Each day, he changed, even if only in the smallest ways. He no longer kept himself completely detached as before. Simple gestures, like when he started smiling at her, even if it was a hesitant smile, it carried a silent gratitude. Or when he no longer recoiled when she approached to care for him. These small but significant signs showed that Nathaniel was gradually changing. Olivia did not know if she could help him overcome all the fears locked within him, but she knew that without her, Nathaniel would continue to live in the darkness of his own fears. She had no miracles to offer, but she had patience. And that was something Nathaniel was beginning to recognize. Though Nathaniel was not yet ready to face everything from his past, Olivia knew that he was slowly learning to confront himself, and like a patient gradually healing, Nathaniel was beginning to feel the relief of knowing he no longer had to face everything alone. Day by day, Olivia was the only person Nathaniel allowed to come near him. Throughout his treatment at St. Anne's, she became the only one who could touch the closed-off world he had built, even if it was just through the smallest gestures. Each time Olivia entered his hospital room, Nathaniel no longer reacted as strongly as before. He no longer flinched or put up a rigid front whenever she approached, though he still maintained a certain distance. That distance was not something easy to overcome, and Olivia understood that in order to break through it, she needed even more patience. One afternoon, as the weak sunlight filtered through the hospital window, Nathaniel stared at the beams of light, seemingly lost in thought. Olivia said nothing, only stood in silence watching him. She knew Nathaniel disliked people prying into his life, but she also sensed that a part of him was searching for something different. There was a subtle change in his eyes. They were no longer entirely cold. Instead, they now carried emotions Olivia recognized as exhaustion, the weariness of a man trying to escape his past, but fearing the confrontation with his present. Olivia cautiously stepped closer to the hospital bed, gently placing her hand on the blanket covering Nathaniel. He did not react, only exhaled softly, as if he had grown accustomed to her presence. Normally, he would have turned away or asked her to leave, but today, he remained silent. Olivia could feel the tension in the air, yet it was accompanied by a tenderness she had never seen in him before. She did not rush, nor did she want to do anything that might make him uncomfortable. She simply stood there, patiently waiting for him to speak. And then, after a prolonged silence, Nathaniel looked up at her. His gaze was no longer just cold and distant. There was something fragile in it, as though he was allowing himself to open up just a little. "I've never told anyone about my past," he said, his voice hoarse. Yet there was a sense that he was ready to share something significant. "No one understands. I've only ever known how to live in fear." Olivia remained quiet, simply listening. She knew this was a huge step for Nathaniel. A man who had always lived behind an impenetrable wall was now slowly lowering his defenses. However, his words were incomplete, lacking the emotional connection she had hoped for. Nathaniel still maintained a great distance, as if he was saying what needed to be said, but did not truly want her to understand. His words were stiff, devoid of the rawness of a confession. But Olivia knew this wasn't easy for him. "There was someone I loved," Nathaniel continued, his eyes drifting toward the window as if searching for her image in the fading sunlight. She left me without an explanation. Since then, I haven't been able to trust anyone. I just can't. The only thing I know how to do is protect myself from the people who could hurt me." His words clenched Olivia's heart. She understood that his past was not just about fear. It was about deep, profound pain from being abandoned by the one he had trusted most. That pain had embedded itself into his mind, making it impossible for him to open up to anyone again. But Olivia also realized that in those words, Nathaniel was beginning to chip away at the stronghold he had built around himself. He might not have been ready to admit it yet, but this act of sharing was a clear sign that he was slowly learning to face his past. Olivia didn't know what to say, because she understood that no words of comfort could erase the pain Nathaniel carried inside. However, she knew that simply being there, patiently and respectfully, would help him feel safer. She couldn't make his wounds disappear overnight, but she could stand by his side, walking with him on the journey he had to take. Nathaniel fell silent again, his eyes distant, as if fighting an internal battle. Olivia stood close, saying nothing more, simply observing his every subtle movement. She might not understand everything, but she could see that he was beginning to break down his inner barriers, just a little. She could sense the change in him, small as it was, but profoundly meaningful. In the days that followed, Nathaniel began making small gestures that showed he was changing. One morning, when Olivia walked into his hospital room, she found him sitting up, drinking water on his own, without needing assistance. Though he still looked weary and weak, the act of taking care of himself showed Olivia the effort he was making. Gradually, Nathaniel no longer kept an absolute distance. He began looking at her longer, not just as a nurse, but as a companion. These were only minor actions, yet they signified something important. Nathaniel was slowly learning to trust again, cautiously but steadily. Olivia couldn't help but notice that, little by little, Nathaniel was becoming different. Though he wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet, she could feel that a part of him was beginning to open up. His steps were slow, but he was no longer the man who only hid behind his cold demeanor. He was starting to show signs of someone confronting himself, a man who no longer lived solely in fear, but was trying to step out of the shadows of his past. Olivia knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also understood that, with each passing day, Nathaniel was moving closer to the truth he had long denied. She didn't know if the bond between them would grow into something greater, but she was certain of one thing. No matter what happened, Nathaniel no longer had to face this life alone. And that, above all, was the most important thing. Because Olivia knew that sometimes, change didn't come from grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but from the small, quiet steps a person took without even realizing they had begun their journey forward. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, St. Anne's suddenly became the center of attention. A tabloid, filled with speculative and unreliable information, had unexpectedly published a shocking article. The headline was laden with insinuations. The mysterious woman caring for Nathaniel Pierce, a strange relationship, or just a manipulative scheme. The Attached to the article were grainy photos taken at St. Anne's, accompanied by a pressing question. Was there something between Nathaniel and Olivia that went beyond professional boundaries? Like a tidal wave, the news spread rapidly, stirring not only the media, but the entire public. The story of a world-renowned tech billionaire and a simple nurse instantly captivated the nation's curiosity. Other newspapers quickly jumped on the bandwagon, and from there, the rumors surrounding Nathaniel and Olivia grew increasingly complex and relentless. Olivia's image appeared across tabloids, even though she had never sought attention. Now she had become part of a narrative she could no longer control. When Nathaniel received the news, he was consumed by fury and concern. He wasn't just angry about the invasion of his private life. He was afraid that Olivia would be dragged into a world full of scandal and relentless public scrutiny. To Nathaniel, the world around him had always been a raging storm, where anyone could be turned into a pawn for those seeking to exploit them. He feared that Olivia's presence in his life would only serve as a gateway, pulling her into an endless cycle of exposure and criticism. His world, filled with high-stakes contracts and ruthless negotiations, was already too complicated, too full of hidden traps. He didn't want Olivia, with her pure and simple heart, to be forced to face such hardships. That evening, as the light dimmed and darkness settled over the hospital, Nathaniel made a decision. He needed to talk to Olivia. He invited her into his hospital room, and when she stepped inside, his eyes were tense, filled with unspoken worries. "Olivia," he began, his voice cold, but unable to mask his exhaustion. "There's something I need to say. The rumors are spreading, and I don't want you to get caught up in this. You don't deserve this kind of attention." Olivia stood still, sensing the heavy tension in the air. She had never imagined things would escalate this far, but she also understood that Nathaniel, despite his outward strength, had weaknesses he refused to show. He was afraid she would leave, afraid she wouldn't be able to endure the scrutiny that he had faced all his life. "I don't want you to get hurt," Nathaniel continued, lowering his gaze to his hands, as if trying to hide the vulnerability he despised revealing. "This world isn't kind, and if you choose to leave, I won't blame you. I will let you go." Olivia remained silent, not rushing to respond, not reacting with anger or fear. Instead, she stepped closer to Nathaniel, sitting beside his hospital bed. She didn't speak right away, but simply looked into his eyes that, beneath all the composure, held a flicker of fear. Then gently she reached out and took his hand. The warmth of her touch spread through him, yet it wasn't enough to dispel the tension in the room. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice calm but unwavering, "I don't care what people say. What matters is that I'm here, because I want to be here. I'm not leaving, no matter what happens." Nathaniel stared at her in shock, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Olivia's response wasn't just defiance against baseless rumors. It was a declaration of her commitment to him. She wasn't afraid of the public's gaze, wasn't bothered by the invasion of their privacy. The only thing that mattered was that she had chosen to stay, despite the world buzzing with speculation about their relationship. "Olivia," Nathaniel stammered, unable to find the words. He couldn't comprehend how she could face this situation with such unwavering resolve. "You aren't afraid?" Olivia let out a soft smile, not one of mockery or amusement, but one that carried the wisdom of someone who had come to understand the true value of emotions. Someone who knew that love and sincerity couldn't be measured by the opinions of outsiders or the weight of baseless gossip. "Afraid?" she echoed. "I've been afraid of many things in my life, Nathaniel, but not now. Not when I've made the decision to stand by you." Nathaniel fell silent, his eyes dark and weary. Olivia's words tore through him, splitting him between his fear of loss and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was the first person to see him not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but as a man. And still, Olivia didn't let go of his hand. She didn't walk away like so many others might have. She didn't need to say anything more. Her actions spoke louder than words. Olivia had chosen to stay. She had chosen to face the chaos, to trust in something deeper than public perception. No amount of public scrutiny could shake her, and the rumors were nothing more than passing whispers in the wind. Olivia knew that as long as she stayed by Nathaniel's side, refusing to give up, one day he would realize he didn't have to fight alone anymore. At this moment, though Nathaniel still couldn't fully articulate everything he felt, Olivia knew she had given him something no one else had before. The belief in a love that was unconditional, fearless, and untouchable by the world's judgment. Their relationship was not a fairy tale, but a journey, one filled with trials, where each of them had to confront their own fears and scars. But it was in moments like this, moments of quiet yet overwhelming intensity, that their connection grew stronger, deeper, and unbreakable. In recent days, Nathaniel had gradually become a different person, but the change within him was not yet fully evident. Though he was a successful businessman, every decision he made was calculated with careful precision, each step meticulously thought through. But this time, what he had to confront was not a contract or a business matter. It was his own emotions, something he had always tried to avoid. Olivia, with her patience and sincerity, had reached the deepest part of his soul, a place he himself never dared to touch. The media frenzy only grew more intense. Newspapers, television programs, and social analysts all speculated about Nathaniel and Olivia's relationship. Skeptical glances. These were challenges Nathaniel was not prepared to handle easily. He had spent his life in solitude, and the outside world only made him feel fearful and anxious. He did not want Olivia to bear the burden of that scrutiny, nor did he want her to be dragged into the controversies that constantly surrounded him. But deep down, Nathaniel knew he could not keep pushing her away forever. The choice between keeping Olivia by his side or pushing her away to protect her from this invasive world became an internal battle Nathaniel struggled fiercely with. He could not forget the past, how he had always created invisible barriers to protect himself. But this time, Olivia's presence was something he did not want to lose. He had come to realize that no matter what, keeping her close was what he truly wanted. One evening, as the hospital lights dimmed, Nathaniel felt his fear looming over him like a shadow. That overwhelming anxiety intensified as Olivia sat beside him, tending to him with her usual gentle and attentive touch. She was the only one who stayed, even when everything around him became chaotic and difficult. She never left, never looked at him with pity, only quiet acceptance and genuine care. Yet despite this, Nathaniel could not shake off the fear that he would hurt her, that their closeness would only entangle them both in complications they could not escape. Olivia gazed at him tenderly, saying nothing, but her eyes held unwavering determination. She had not abandoned him, had not retreated, despite the challenges from the world outside. No matter how afraid Nathaniel was, no matter how much he tried to push her away, she remained unchanging. Then, at a decisive moment, when all his thoughts of protection and fear collided, Nathaniel realized he could no longer live in hesitation. He had to face his greatest fear, had to accept the emotions he had spent years running from. He looked at Olivia, saw the sincerity in her eyes, and felt something inside him begin to melt. In that instant, he stopped thinking about everything else, only about the extraordinary feeling Olivia had awakened in him. For the first time since they had met, Nathaniel reached out and took Olivia's hand. It was not just a simple gesture, it was an act of immense significance, a declaration of his resolve. The warmth of Olivia's palm met his, and to his surprise, the touch was no longer the unbearable pain he had always known. Instead, it brought a relief he had never imagined. He had broken through the barrier, not just a medical condition, but a turning point in his life. Olivia's eyes shone with quiet understanding as she met his gaze, a soft smile appearing on her lips. "You don't have to be afraid," she said, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "I'm here, Nathaniel. I will always be here." Her words, though simple, carried a profound strength that Nathaniel had never experienced before. The patience, sincerity, and love Olivia had shown him had slowly melted away every wall he had built around himself. A feeling of freedom, unlike anything he had ever known, welled up within Nathaniel as he held Olivia's hand. He no longer felt trapped in his own fears, no longer burdened by the past that had haunted him. In that moment, Nathaniel understood that love was not something to be feared. It was something that could help him overcome everything if only he allowed himself to embrace it. And with Olivia, he had found a peace he had never thought possible. Though Nathaniel had once been filled with doubt and fear, he now realized that accepting his feelings was not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it was a strength he had never recognized within himself. His fingers tightened gently around Olivia's, and his heart pounded, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with certainty. He no longer wanted to keep his distance, no longer wanted to protect himself by pushing people away. He had learned that sometimes it was closeness that healed the deepest wounds. With Olivia by his side, Nathaniel found that he was no longer afraid. The worries about the future, about betrayal, about the unknown, they slowly faded away. He had faced his fears and was no longer shackled by them. This decision, however difficult, had become a defining moment in his life. Olivia met his gaze, and in that moment, she knew Nathaniel had come a long way. The scars of the past still lingered, but now he had begun to heal. And above all else, in that fleeting, precious moment, they both realized something more valuable than all their fears: the genuine connection between them and the love that had begun to take root. Time passed, and Nathaniel gradually changed. The long days spent in the hospital room, buried in closed-off thoughts and emotions, became a thing of the past. The walls he had built to shield himself from the outside world were no longer as unyielding as before. Olivia, with her patience and sincerity, had slowly dismantled each layer of his defenses. He not only found comfort in her presence, but also began to realize that life did not have to be lived in solitude and fear. The emotions he once considered a burden had now become the very thing helping him rediscover himself. The mornings when Olivia changed his bandages, the evenings when she sat by his bedside, the silent moments filled with unspoken understanding. These were what made Nathaniel realize he no longer had to face everything alone. At first, their conversations were merely polite exchanges, simple inquiries about his condition. But over time, they evolved into deeper discussions about life, about the things he had long kept hidden. One afternoon, as Olivia was preparing to leave his hospital room after a long day, Nathaniel suddenly called her back. "Olivia," he said, his eyes tired but no longer distant as they once were. "Thank you for everything." Those words were not just a casual expression of gratitude. They carried the weight of everything Nathaniel had felt but had never been able to fully articulate. It was an acknowledgement of the changes Olivia had brought into his life, even if he couldn't yet put all his emotions into words. Olivia smiled, her eyes lighting up with gentle warmth. She didn't need him to say everything. Just by looking at him, she knew the wounds in his soul were slowly healing. The sense of safety she brought, the patience she had for him, had helped him begin to let go of the fears he had hidden for so many years. But even as they grew closer, Nathaniel had yet to completely overcome his past traumas. There were moments when he became silent, unwilling to speak, as if all the emotions inside him needed time to surface. Olivia never pressured him to open up immediately. She simply stayed by his side, allowing him the time he needed to face feelings he was not yet ready to share. She understood that sometimes direct confrontation wasn't the only way to help him heal. Sometimes simply being there, listening, and offering quiet support was enough. It was in these moments that Nathaniel began to understand that he did not have to fear vulnerability, did not have to fear the pain that came with accepting love and being loved in return. Step by step, he learned to manage his condition, not through medical treatments or temporary solutions, but through the unwavering emotional support Olivia provided. It was no longer about the pressure of an illness, but about a profound shift in how he saw life. Olivia was not the only person who had helped Nathaniel through his struggles, but she was the only one who made him feel that there was something greater beyond his fear. The long nights in the hospital were no longer lonely or monotonous. They became moments of self-discovery, reminders that even wounds, no matter how deep, could heal. One day, as they sat together drinking coffee, Nathaniel looked directly at Olivia and said, "You know, there was a time when I didn't understand why I was trapped in my past for so long, but now I see that I don't have to live in it forever. I can change. Thank you for helping me see that." Olivia lifted her head, her warm smile reaching her eyes. She knew this was not an easy turning point. In reality, significant changes in life never happened overnight, but she also understood that Nathaniel's words were a clear sign that he had begun to let go of the barriers he had spent years building. Their relationship had evolved beyond simple trust. It had grown into something deeper, a love built not just on empathy, but on genuine connection. A place where both could share their wounds and their deepest emotions without fear. Nathaniel was no longer the lonely man he once was. He had learned to open up, even if hesitantly, even if cautiously. His life was no longer just about business negotiations, contracts, and cold calculated numbers. Instead, he began to find meaning in the simplest moments, in morning conversations with Olivia about nothing in particular, in the quiet evenings when they sat together, saying nothing but understanding everything. Nathaniel and Olivia's story was not a fairy tale, but a journey, one filled with struggles and growth. They had not only overcome external challenges, but had also faced their own inner battles, ones that were far more difficult to conquer. What Nathaniel had learned was not how to cure an illness, but how to accept himself, how to embrace his past, and how to truly live in the present. And Olivia, with her unwavering love and patience, had become the only one who could help Nathaniel rediscover the true meaning of life. Their love was not perfect, but it was within that imperfection that they found peace and happiness, the kind they both had always deserved. Nathaniel and Olivia's story is not simply about the relationship between a billionaire CEO and a nurse. It is a journey they embarked on together, where each step forward was not just a progression in their relationship, but also a battle to confront their deepest fears. They not only learned to trust each other, but also discovered the untapped strength within themselves. Nathaniel, the man everyone knew for his power and cold demeanor, was no longer just a CEO in expensive suits. He was now a man who had learned to accept his wounds and fears. And Olivia was not just the person who cared for him through his most difficult days. She was the one who helped him understand that love is not pain, but healing. Throughout this journey, Nathaniel gradually realized that strength did not come from power or the numbers he controlled, but from the ability to face himself and everything he had neglected for so many years. True strength was not about exerting control over everything, but about acceptance, accepting oneself, accepting help, and acknowledging that no one can truly live alone in this world. Nathaniel was no longer just a man who made cold, calculated decisions. He was someone who sought connection, empathy, and love from those around him. With Olivia by his side, Nathaniel began to understand that love was not a burden or a chain, but something that allowed him to see himself more clearly. The late-night conversations, the warmth of a hand held in silence, the quiet moments spent together, these small things gradually transformed his life. Olivia was not his savior. She was the person who led him back to himself, who showed him another path in the harsh and unforgiving world he had built for himself. She was the only one who helped him realize that there was a life beyond contracts, beyond work and fame. A life where he could share, love, and most importantly, live honestly with his own emotions. One day, as the sun began to set behind the towering skyscrapers, Nathaniel stood on the rooftop of his tallest building, a place he had once thought he could never face. But today, standing atop everything he had built, he no longer felt alone or lost among the wealth and power surrounding him. The buildings, the crowded streets, all of it faded into the background beneath the warm glow of something far greater. He no longer looked at the world with the same guarded and skeptical eyes. Now, he saw the world as a part of himself, as a real person, no longer someone who had to hide the truth of who he was. Olivia stood beside him, saying nothing, only silently offering her unwavering support. She didn't need to speak. Just being there was enough. She knew that her love was not meant to erase his past or make everything easier, but her presence and patience had given him the strength to find himself again. Slowly, he no longer felt like he had to face the world alone. The sense of security Olivia brought was something he had never known before, and now, with her by his side, he felt ready to face anything. Looking out at the horizon, Nathaniel felt a sense of freedom he had never experienced before. No longer a man afraid to confront his own emotions, he stood there, hand in hand with Olivia, as if making a silent promise to himself. He had learned that strength was not in pushing people away, but in having the courage to let them in. No matter the challenges ahead, he was no longer afraid, because he knew that nothing was insurmountable when he had someone by his side. Nathaniel and Olivia's story is not a fairy tale. There are no miracles or magical transformations. But in the slow, steady steps they took, in the words left unspoken, they found the most precious thing of all. A love that was not about possession, but about understanding and sharing. Their love was not perfect, but in its imperfections, they found peace, healing, and acceptance. Nathaniel was no longer the lonely man he once was. He had learned to live, not just to exist, but to truly live, to love, and to be loved. And by his side, Olivia remained, not just in moments of hardship, but in moments of happiness, where love did not need to be explained, only felt. In Nathaniel's eyes, the world was no longer something to fear. No matter how many challenges lay ahead, he no longer felt abandoned, no longer felt as though he had to face life alone, because he had Olivia by his side, and that was all he needed to move forward. Thus, through this journey, their story becomes a message of change, of courage, and of the power of love. Love is not just salvation. It is healing, companionship through the storms of life. And when we learn to open our hearts and embrace love, we will never feel alone in this world.